Hello and welcome to this edition of Tips and Tricks. Now today I'm going to be talking about pinning bass. Pinning bass will help you catch more bass and bigger bass. Now I'm pretty sure at this point I probably have to explain what pinning bass is, because it's not really something that most people would think of or a terminology that most people would think of when they're thinking of bass fishing. They're kind of like, pinning bass? What are you talking about when you're saying pinning bass? Well, I like to use analogies, and analogies that people can kind of understand. It's something that's an everyday thing that doesn't really have to do with fishing, but it's something that they know about, so it helps them relate to what I'm talking about when I get into relaying it to bass fishing. And so I'm going to start out, and okay, this is going to be about a person and their dog. Okay, so you have your dog, you have Fido with you, and say you're out in the middle of a wide open park, and you have Fido on his leash, and all of a sudden, you know, Fido backs up or something and his leash comes off. And like I said, you're out in the middle of a big park. There's nothing around, there's no trees, there's nothing, just nothing but open space. And Fido decides he wants to play chase. You keep telling him to come here and he's like, no. And he wants to run. And so here you are out in the middle of this park, nothing around, running around trying to catch this dog. And he can go anywhere he wants. He can turn to the left or right. He can back up. He can go forward. He can just run you around in circles because there's nothing out there. It's just out in the open. Well, then, say Fido gets out in your, your backyard. You start to open the door and he rushes out and you're like, come in, he won't come in. So you have to go out there and get Fido and put him back in the house. Well, in your backyard, you got a fence around it, you got the house there. You got a lot of things that you can pin the dog next to make it easier for you to catch the dog. I mean, you can pin him in the corner of the fence, or you can pin him up against the house. You can pin him and give him less options to escape from you, so it'll be a lot easier to grab him than it would if you're out in the middle of that open field. Okay, so that's probably the analogy that most of us can relate to, something that's probably happened to most of us at one point. Well, how does this relate to bass fishing? Well, when I'm talking about pinning the bass, it's actually what the bass do to their prey. Bass want an easy meal. They're pretty much a lazy predator, like a lot of predators. That's why they're a predator. They're smart enough and they know how to get an easy meal. And to get an easy meal, they will pin their bait or make the strike at or attempt to eat their bait when it is in fact pinned. Now, you got the analogy with the backyard where you got the fence or the house or things that the dog, limits its options. Well, when you're bass fishing, you have a big rock on the bottom. You have the post to a dock. You have, logs that are laying on the bottom or coming in and down into the water. Well, those are the places where you want your bait to be next to and right up against, because like if you run it down the side of a log, the bass knows that the options for that escape route for that bait fish is trying to eat is limited. It's blocked by the log being behind it, so it can either go forward or it can go this way, but it can't go away. And they use that to pin their bait, and in this case pin the lure that you're using to fish for them, so they can get an easier meal because the options are limited for the escape, hence an easier meal. And like I say, it can be a rock on the bottom. A lot of times you're working a jig, you might work it to the rock, and all of a sudden you start to bring it up it, and that's when the fish hits. Or you're on the top of it and you bring it over the bottom, and that's when the fish hits. Or you don't know, but you're coming next to it. Like you're working along, it's out in the open, all of a sudden it's coming up next to this big rock that you don't hit, but you come right next to it. That fish might be somewhere around there, he sees it, opportunity, boom. It's pinned against that, it has least options, boom, that's when you get your hit. And this works too on the flat bottom. If there's a rock around, that's even better, but even on the flat bottom, they can come from above and make their approach, which limits its escape route. Or when they're on the surface, they can't go above the water, so when the bass are there and they're below them, when something's on the surface, it's basically pinned against the surface, has less escape opportunities, so that's when they often will hit a topwater lure, because it's pinned against the surface and its escape routes are limited. And also when you're onshore, and I see a lot of people onshore and they just cast straight out. I mean, if there's bushes out there, stumps, or a weed line or something that, yeah, the bass can use to have the advantage to pin it, then that's great. But if it's just open water, it's kind of back to the scenario of the dog in the park, where it's really hard for them to get an attack angle, or to them to think they have an attack angle, so they're probably less inquired to actually hit that bait when it's just out in the open. But if you cast it kind of parallel to shore, as that shoreline is coming up and that surface is coming up, that little triangle and your bait's right here and the bass is over here, he's pinning it because it's stuck in that reduced area. So that's why they often hit things right up against the bank and up against shore, because they sit out here and they're pinning it because they know it's a less options for the bait to escape. So that's why pinning bass is what you need to think of when you're fishing, because there's so many opportunities to fish it. I mean, when the log's there and you're just coming, you're hitting the log and going over it this way, compared to running it right down the log where that fish all the way along, if there's a fish, it has the advantage because it's kind of pinned against that log and the escape route is limited. And like I said, the piling of the docks, I mean, you'd think, all right, well, it's like that big, but still, if something's right, comes up to it and is up against it and the bass is there, I said it can't go through the piling. I mean, it would have to back up to go this way, and it would have to go. So that's why pilings and hitting pilings and bringing things up against it, that's why bass look at those, because they can pin the bait against it. So yeah, hopefully this helps you guys. I know hopefully my analogy and all that kind of worked for you guys, so you guys get a better concept. But it's just something, especially when you're new to fishing, or something a lot of people don't really think about, because like I said, that there's a lot of bait around them, like the dog that got loose in the park, that's just all around them, and they know that if they just try to chase it around, they're not going to catch it. So that's why pinning is so important, to so they can limit the option of its escape, because they're lazy. They want an easy meal. They just sit in ambush, and that's where they'll position themselves to ambush stuff. So that's it. Pinning bass, and how it'll probably get you more fish and probably a lot bigger fish. I hope this helps. Until next time.